let's not waste any time, let's get straight into it. Automobilista 2 has just dropped its latest development update. It's from Renato Simeone, who's the project manager over at Reiza Studios, in charge of a lot of what they do with Automobilista 2, and he drops these infrequently, and if you missed it, I only caught this on Twitter, I think by random. Well, you can either digest it here in audio form. I'm going to be giving you my thoughts along the way. There is a lot to get through. I'll leave timestamps in the bottom for the relevant chapters. We'll go through that in just a second, or if you just want to skip this and read it, I'll leave a link to this post just below as well. He's going to go through a number of things, including updates on time trial leaderboards. He talks a little bit about the historical track pack part 2, that's coming soon. Some audio development stuff that's happened, some conclusions to the big 1.5 physics overhaul that happened with the last big update. He gives an update on some wet weather physics development as well. AI development has had some work. There's some word on multiplayer development, but it's probably not what everybody wants, and some other fixes and improvements. We're going to go through this bit by bit. I'm going to kind of go through it line by line. I'm going to give you my thoughts along the way, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think this is good? Do you think this is bad? I think you'll probably think it's good. So let's get into the meat and bones of it. So he says, "Greetings everyone. It's been almost 5 months since our last development update in June, and almost 3 months since our last public release. Not exactly a lifetime in game development, but a first for Automobilista 2. Never since its original early access release has there been such a big gap with neither new game updates nor detailed news about them. This isn't a sign that Automobilista 2 development is slowing down. On the contrary, behind the scenes this has been one of the most intense and productive development cycles we have had. The results from this especially long cycle soon to be shared with you all. Personally, for me, as a user of Automobilista 2, I'd rather them spend as much time as possible refining this. If they need a little bit longer, Renato, you take as long as you need, mate. Those of you used to following these developer updates will have read a lot about the challenges to development and managing a game of this size. Many cars, tracks, simulation variables, all of which under constant development with new features and new variables being brought in all the time, keeping goalposts ever moving and making it harder to make it work cohesively. The game by design being a constant construction site and some untidiness comes with the territory. The only manner we could tackle such an ambitious project was by leaving perfectionism at the door and just keep building on one update at a time. Deliver good first, then push to make it better. This has been the approach for every new car, track, or feature. Sometimes that initial good wasn't even that good. Sometimes it was more than that, but up to this point, we never set out to make everything as good as we could make it to begin with. That would have to come later, once more building blocks were in place. For me, let's unpick that. I do think kind of Automobilista 2 does suffer a little bit of jack of all trades. I think there is some very, very good bits of Automobilista 2, and there's just some cars that just don't work. However, with each new update, things are gradually getting improved, and this sounds like very much they're refining it even more. So, you know, so the sandbox kind of mentality which they've approached Automobilista 2 with, I mean, it's one of the only games you can pretty much jump in and play anything. It's something that I really enjoy, and if they refine that, it's even better. Let's continue. So, with the release of version 1.5, we have reached the point at which it's finally time to focus less on creating potential and more on fulfilling it. Good. After the last version 1.5.0.5, that has been the primary guideline for all development fronts. Polish everything to the best we can within the window of time we have. As we dug into it, what was at first a development guideline became a bit obsessive. Simply put, we would not have a new public release until we felt everything was as good as we could possibly make it, or at the very least heartwarmingly close to as far as the core of the simulation is concerned. Physics, force feedback, AI, audio, and all related functionalities. This all sounds very good. Under that approach, and with no clearly defined goals, timelines became even harder to assess. As the more polished, the more room for improvement we dug into, which then required further polishing, and then brought up further room for improvement in what seemed to be a never-ending loop. And as we went through that loop, days became weeks, which then became months, and ultimately we decided to merge what were supposed to be two separate development cycles into one, and now we are finally about to wrap everything up for the Automobilista 2 version 1.5.3 release. So this is what it's all building up to. Anyone that's been new to Automobilista 2, Automobilista 2 has changed dramatically. I've been involved with it for probably about 2 years now, and from the landscape of where it started to where it is, it's a dramatically different simulator. I thought it was fantastic to begin with. I really enjoyed it. It was the first thing I started kind of getting involved with, and it's definitely morphed and developed. So it's more like, it's very much an investment with this. You know, some people say, oh, it's a bit like early access, it's not finished. I think that's a bit unfair. I think there's a lot of stuff here that's worth getting stuck into. And as you can see, they are actively working on it to develop and improve it. This isn't meant to overhype the new update much, to pretend perfection has been reached, not least as we don't believe that is an attainable goal in sim racing yet. Everything can always still be made a little or even a lot better. That goes for the core simulation as well as the whole production surrounding it. After this release, we'll certainly still have great many new things to achieve, a few solvable niggles will have slipped by which will demand quick fixing, and bigger problems will remain to be understood and improved on. Plans are already in works for the 2024 and beyond for further substantial progress. Excellent, including a complete GUI overhaul, an area we didn't do much work on for this update. Set to general user interface. Some updates on the rendering engine, another area we haven't dug into beyond adjustments here and there. A content management system, this is great. Content management is cool because if people like mods, I love Content Manager for Assetto Corsa, and if we can just drag and drop what the community makes into this, this turns it into an absolute machine. For those who are interested in parts of the game but not in others, and who might want to combo that with mods for a more focused experience, very cool. A more robust multiplayer dedicated server tool, as well as plenty more cool cars and tracks to fill up all the dots towards the end game of an encompassing career mode. Finally, we've been waiting for career mode for a very long time. That ties this whole thing together, among other things that will certainly lead to Automobilista 2 taking further leaps until its development finally wraps for good. So again, we've got the roadmap, but they have been saying this career mode and multiplayer for a very, very long time. So as and when that's going to materialize, it's not this update, is anybody's guess. In line to the above, the next update could be seen just as another step towards the next step, just as all that came before, and in terms of introducing new content, features, and improvements to the sim with a single update that certainly has been bigger ones before it. Version 1.5 being the big one that we all know about. And even though we are satisfied with the results right now, the satisfaction is bound to be short-lived as further development makes the current obsolete. An urge to move bar for the whole thing higher inevitably kicks in again. It's difficult to gauge where you are on a journey when you're not sure how far away the destination is, but this update marks the first time we've delivered everything we had in reach at the point of release, and that makes version 1.5.3 a milestone update in its own right. Enough with the rambling then, and let's have a look at the specifics of what you expect to get from the new update. This is the meat and bones, right? So again, it's refining the whole experience. So update on time trial leaderboards. Now we all know that kind of every time a new update gets released, the time trial gets nuked, right? And we all have to start from scratch again. So he says, firstly, we'd like to acknowledge this fumble and assure all TT boards will be back live upon the release of 1.5.3. Long story short, we had mentioned in the last development update before 1.5, the new Physics Overhaul would require resetting and setups and TT leaderboards, the latter being held back until we had another cycle to fine-tune the physics revisions. We did end up resetting the boards at the point we believed to be on the verge to wrap up for the release, only to pull it back due to another minor physics breakthrough, leading to the board staying out since. We couldn't reinstate all boards once they were cleared, and there wouldn't be much sense in having new boards up only to reset them again now, so leaving it off until the update was the only choice after the deed had been done. They're apologising, they're assuring us that they'll be more careful in how we manage future resets if they're ever necessary again. This has been a point of irritation because it's been very hard to go and invest in those time trial leaderboards knowing that they're just going to be reset on a big physics overhaul. It sort of makes sense because if the car's handled differently and some are quicker or slower based on kind of the physics being applied, then all the time trials that came before it are either going to be unfair, either above or below. So it's it's anybody's best guess. So this is a good thing. Historical Track Pack Part 2, the Automobilista 2 History Tour continues. So this is more tracks and more cars. If that's your bag, we're getting more. So it's not complete refinement, but we are getting some more content as well. All the ongoing groundwork on the fundamentals wouldn't hold back the content teams from doing their thing. And on this front, track and vehicle teams have continued to deliver brilliantly with some exciting new content coming up with a new update in the form of 2 downloadable content packs, one of which being the second Historical Track Pack featuring 4 additional historical versions for modern tracks already present in the game. Number 1. Barcelona 99. So early this year, we had Circuit de Catalunya as it is today, and with version 1.5.3, the shorter national layout will be added to the DLC pack. Track has already had some history behind it. He talks about inaugurated in 1991, hosted rounds of many high-profile championships, becoming a staple in the F1 calendar, with the Spanish GP every year. The track back then looked distinctly modern versus other tracks in 91, and while it's proved to be ahead of its time, remaining one of the top grade A tracks in the world with minimal reforms in the past 32 years, it looked quite different back then, so they've added that in. In terms of layout, he says the amazingly fast Campsa corner was even faster back then with a shallower angle, leading to another fast right left S corner that still exists but was retired from use back in 94. So we're getting Barcelona 1991. Next, we've got Interlagos 1991-1993. He goes on to describe the classic Interlagos circuit in 2 slightly different versions as they were in Senna's 2 brilliant GP victories. You'll be able to relive that, fresh out of the reform that reduced its total length from the amazing original 7,873 kilometer layout, we've already got that in the game, to the shorter but still excellent 4,325 kilometer layout. It's by large remained the same to this day. Most of the track changes were in its topography, with a big climb in between turn 6 and turn 7, where the new layout shortcut to the infield section getting smoothed out in 1995, and run-ups around the track being mostly off camber, including the exit of turn 11, which made going off that particularly hairy back in the day. So if going back in time is your bag and you like to relive all those kind of memories, you know, this is a little bit before my time. You know, I would have been 80, 89, 89, I think about 3 or 4 at the time. So I've only ever seen this kind of, well, in repeat races. But if this is your bag and you want to go relive the glory days, you can go and do that. Montreal 1991, it's another track which features an Automobilista 2 with an older version from 1988, but 1991 being an interim evolution between them as it is that year, and the track was reformed to lower the very high curbs it had up to the point and tighten the previously absurdly fast last right left S into the last chicane that remains pretty much unchanged to this day. The track was still tighter in places, he says, than it is currently, and big sawtooth curves and lack of runoffs anywhere meant the room for error was much smaller. Despite the superficial layout similarities as you get to drive each of these historical tracks, it should be evident how different they actually are. From overall standards for racetracks has shifted in the last 30 years since these versions were raced on, from the bumps and the curbing to the barriers and the runoffs, or lack thereof. These tracks provide a very different experience and some additional challenges relative to their modern counterparts, and are thus more suitable for race cars from this era, of which Automobilista 2 has plenty. Good point, to be raced on. Given that the limited rework involved in these alternative historical versions, Part 2 will be priced a bit cheaper than Part 1 for a very reasonable $7.99. So you'll get all 4 layouts described for that. So again, this will be paid content, so $7.99, and I think this still comes as part of the season pass, but don't quote me. I think this still comes as part of the first historical track pack. Formula High Tech Automobilista 2 goes active. New car. So the early 90s tracks as featured just above, we've just spoken about them in the historical track pack part 2, they're very bumpy. Luckily, we have just the right machinery to handle them, and version 1.5.3 will introduce the Formula High Techs, headlined by 2 official McLaren F1 cars from an era in which technology truly started to pervade Grand Prix racing. Cars of this era were equipped with various gadgets such as traction control, launch control, ABS, active suspension. The first 3 we all know about, and they've continued to be used in various motorsport classes ever since, but active suspension was so revolutionary and so distorted the nature of the competition that it got banned within 2 seasons, never to return. And for the first time in sim racing, Automobilista 2 users will be able to experience what it was like to drive with it. The system has been already experimented with on and off through the 80s, but only in the 90s was there enough computing power to make the best of it. The system did away with the usual springs, dampers and roll bars of a typical passive suspension, replaced with electronically controlled hydraulic actuators that actively managed the vehicle's vertical movement in order to optimize ride and ensure the car was always at its ideal ride height, irrespective of the bumps it was going over and the loads it was under. They've posted a link to a demo video just below. I will link that in the description if you want to look at that, if you're listening to this along the way, but I won't play that now for you because there's probably some copyright things there. Beyond that obvious performance benefit, the system allowed teams to get creative in exploring other ways to gain lap time, one of which being the original drag reduction system, that's DRS, which then drivers could then press a button to change the car's attitude on straights and with it stall the rear wing in order to gain top speed. So this is to facilitate more overtakes. Then pressing the button again to restore the car to its appropriate poise for the next corner. So good. Formula High Tech Gen 1 features 4 distinct generic models along with the official licensed McLaren. The first year in this technological revolution, which Williams got the jump on everyone by introducing once again traction control, launch control, active suspension to deliver the FW14B, and with that car it dominated the season with qualifying times that were often 2 seconds faster than the most conventional car. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was Nigel Mansell's year, wasn't it? The other teams scrambled to try to catch up, and as the season went on, a couple of them introduced traction control, one of which being McLaren with the MP4 7A. The car was a tidy evolution to the iconic MP4 6, finally progressing to semi-auto gearboxes following the lead of both Ferrari and Williams with the Honda V12. It then goes on to say, yeah, we go, so against the mighty Williams FW14B, which Senna once described as being from another planet. Yeah. We then get the Formula High Tech Gen 2, which features 3 distinct generic models, along with the officially licensed McLaren MP4/8, representing the season that proved to be about once the pinnacle and the deathbed of the high-tech era in Grand Prix racing. By this time, most cars on the grid featured, to a varying degree, active suspension, traction control, fully automatic gearboxes. Some of the top teams also had ABS and some primitive form of the blown diffuser trick that would blow hot exhaust fumes into the diffuser to increase downforce, a trick that would be in vogue again almost 20 years later. Williams even dabbled into CVT transmission and Benetton into four-wheel steering, although neither actually raced. Parallel to the electronic revolution, again we're getting we're getting a history lesson here. Parallel to the electronic revolution, teams were making big strides in aerodynamic development, thanks in parts to stable ride provided by the active suspension. In the ever-going quest to contain the speed of the cars, new regulations for that season mandated cars to be narrowed to a maximum of 2 meters, including narrowing of the rear tires from 18 inches to 15 inches, with new constraints applied to wing design, including lowering rear wing height from 100 centimeters to 95. Again, this is just testament to Reiza with kind of the attention to detail they go into with all of this stuff. And, you know, if dabbling in kind of the history of motorsport is your bag, I know I enjoy it. This will allow you to do it to no end. These changes aligned with aggressive aerodynamic development led to cars becoming faster and peakier than ever and heavily reliant on the electronic systems for stability. By the end of the season, the electronic systems were all banned in an attempt to reduce the growing gulf between the have and have-nots and to prevent the continuing electronic developments from making driver skill all but irrelevant. The shift from mechanical grip to aerodynamical downforce was the previous rule changes, however, persisted. The teams no longer could count on active suspension to keep the car stable, which put the sport decisively on the path of tragedies for the following season and compromised the car's ability to race each other closely for decades to come. This inflection point in the history of the sport did, however, produce utterly unique and fascinating machines, and this must have content to feature in Automobilista 2. So the high-tech classes are headlined by the McLaren MP4 and 8, which, despite being underpowered with the switch from the Honda V12 to the consumer Ford V8s and lack of championship success, still proved to be one of the most advanced Formula 1 cars ever, powering Ayrton Senna to some of his most famous wins. As with all of the Senna McLarens, we have had this car under license for a few years already, very true, but if we were to actually model it, we had to do it properly, and to do it with the car featuring all of its main gizmos, traction control, launch control, ABS, active suspension, complete the vintage DRS system. A lot of stuff to tuck into there. Go back, repeat it, have a look at the written transcript as well if you want to digest it a little bit further, but if historical racing is your thing, we're definitely getting a little bit more of it very, very soon. More kind of the nitty-gritty of how the game runs. Audio development. So audio is a big thing for me, really adds to the immersion. The better it gets, the better I think the overall experience is. In the development update preceding the release of the Brazilian Racing Legends DLC last December, which features cars sharing similar engines to the upcoming high-techs, we referred to their glorious engine sounds and how important it was for us to capture that in Automobilista 2. While we believe we succeeded for the onboard sounds, the externals still weren't quite delivering on the experience of actually hearing these cars live. For version 1.5.3, we were determined to go to the distance there. Sounds speak louder than words in this particular topic, and what they've done is given you a preview to what these sound like. I've had a little listen, they sound pretty cool. Again, I'll leave a link to that YouTube video in the description below. Physics Overhaul. So concluding the big 1.5 physics update. As elaborated on the physics development update before the release of version 1.5, they've corrected a bug in tyre carcass and spring and damper calculations which prompted the overhaul that headlined the last update. This was critical as the way the tyre carcass twists, flexes and deflects under load has repercussions not only on the way the tyre itself handles, but also on the car's ride heights, which in turn have major repercussions on its suspension and aerodynamics, which in turn have repercussions on the load the tyre carcass is under. These are very intertwined dynamics, so getting one right is critical for the others. With version 1.5 going a long way towards getting the carcass issues rectified, there was another component in the tyre model still to maximise the tyre tread. In STM, the tread model consists primarily of a complex web of friction, coefficients, and a number of thermodynamic properties which basically define the tyre's optimal operating window and how the various friction coefficients are affected for temperatures under and above that optimal range. These are critical in defining not only how much grip a given tyre has, but also how that grip builds up, sustains, and lets go under various loads and temperatures. He then goes on to say a lot of work has already went into the tread physics over the course of the 1.5 revisions, but unlike the carcass, which is somewhat more absolute and verifiable attributes, the tread coefficients are a much grayer area, and getting them right is even more challenging precisely because there's no verifiable right. When that is the case, and even a 0.01 change in any of these coefficients produce a perceptible difference in handling, getting them to a place that at least seems to be right involves constant research and a lot of old-fashioned and time-consuming trial and error. So it's not flashy and sophisticated or exact work, but it's as critical as any other, if not more. A given sim car may have millimeter accurate suspension geometries, one-on-one aero mapping, and engine torque curve perfectly matching dynamometer figures. If the tires are not gripping and letting go as they should, the experience of driving the car just won't be captured. So I'm a big believer in this. I think particularly even just like servicing my own car, one of the most important factors is what makes you contact the road, right? Because that's the thing keeping you on the road. It keeps you in contact, right? So if you need to get the tire model right first and foremost, and they're certainly taking it very seriously. So given the sheer amount of cars in Automobilista 2, despite all the efforts poured into tread over the course of the version 1.5 revisions, we fully expect there would still be room to improve them, and that the work should continue after version 1.5 to give them further fine-tuning, for which we gave ourselves a few extra weeks. As it turned out, the fine-tuning cycle ended up demanding a lot more than a few weeks, but we have finally made the tyres as good as we could for the time being. Similar fine-tuning has been done in other areas of physics, not necessarily as consequential as tyres, but also very significant, the most notable of which on aerodynamics, where efforts have gone towards adjusting the yaw sensitivity of the various aero devices in high downforce, which make a big difference in how cars behave once it starts sliding, and revising rear wing efficiency at baseline, as we found several cars were still retaining an optimistic amount of total downforce at minimal setting. Brakes have also received updates, fine-tuning brake torque figures, disc thermodynamics, and optimal temperature ranges, which give a perceptible better feel for them. All these adjustments add to a considerable leap in physics accuracy. To an extent, it wouldn't be overselling to say version 1.5.3 is a big step up relative to version 1.5.0.5, as 1.5 has been to previous 1.4. A lot of mouthful there, go back and have a little read about it, but once again, they say that we very much forward to sharing these results with you, very much look forward to sharing these results with you. Almost there. So we're on to wet weather physics and development. Another huge step we didn't quite cover in time for the 1.5 release is that being delivered on is the wet weather physics, where for the first time we've managed to give this the attention it deserves. After all, this engine not so arguably features the most advanced weather model and dynamic track system in all of sim racing. It's what I love about Automobilista 2. You can keep racing the same track, and the weather changes dynamically. There are some sims that just don't do that or don't do it very well. It then goes on to say not exploiting that to the fullest would be a big waste, and unfortunately we were too caught up figuring out dry weather tyres to make the case wet weather physics have been close to wet weather physics have been ever being close to right or as good as they could be for all classes. That case we can make now with improvements both to wet tyres or street/all weather tyre physics on the wet, or even slicks on wet, as well as wet track dynamics. In version 1.5, we introduced a crucial live track development, first in sim racing, making rubber on the racing line more slippery once it gets saturated with water as it does in real life. Very cool. This is a must to properly simulate wet weather driving, as in real life drivers are forced to avoid the racing line as much as possible and instead explore the outer edge of the track for more grip. The wet tyres in the system itself wasn't developed enough to make it evident for version 1.5.0.5, but it is critical to driving fast in version 1.5.3. So again, we're getting that little bit closer to realism. Another critical live track development, version 1.5.3, concerns the way water puddles getting defined and develops as rain falls harder, adjusting the properties that could lead to them quickly growing as deep as 16 centimeters under heavier rain and becoming impossible to drive them without aquaplaning, as no tyre can drain that much water to remain in contact with the tarmac anywhere but modern grade A tracks, which have drains everywhere. In live track, water is actually drained according to where drains are mapped. That's really cool on the track model, and naturally these are realistically models as per real reference in modern and historical tracks alike. Awesome. The end result from these developments is wet weather driving like nothing ever seen before, incredibly fun, very challenging, occasionally scary provided you are on the right tyres and with a reasonable setup, seldom frustrating. Again, I love the wet weather stuff. It really challenges you. It's not a lot, not a lot of other sims do this right. I know iRacing have been perpetually bringing out wet weather and rain for a very long time. But if you want to get your fix, Automobilista 2 looks like it's going to be the place. Some words on AI development. All the physics developments are obviously critical for a racing sim and where efforts are often concentrated on, but for the sim to work as a game, the other fronts need to be up to par too, so you can actually race rather than just experience and hot lap cars, which although is fun, on its own right will. Even with the growing number of sim racers dedicating more and more to multiplayer, there still are certain sim racing itches that only good AI can scratch. No matter how big the online community for a sim may be, you are unlikely to be able to gather a full field of competent racers, join session for whatever car track combo you feel like racing, whenever you feel like racing it, let alone run a full championship according to your specific preferences. Very true, but we still need multiplayer, Reiza. One of our main goals for Automobilista 2 was to deliver on that to become a strong, if not the strongest single-player option in sim racing. I agree with that. A game you could jump into, pick a car from the wide range of motorsports disciplines available past and present with a track to suit it or not, get on track and have a good race with minimal tweaking or settings required for some pure, unadulterated single-player fun. Here again, the scope of the sim, the sheer number of variables and constantly moving parts have detracted from our ability to deliver on that to the standard we wanted it. And while this remains plenty of room for development, version 1.5.3 represents the biggest leap in AI development, thanks to developments in 3 critical fronts. I'm going to talk about them next. I think AI is pretty good in Automobilista 2. I've had some cracking races. So, performance. Although Automobilista 2 development, we have been gradually adding more performance-defining variables, along with moving others that were originally applied globally to all of the cars and be controllable at car level, to the point where we now have enough control over AI performance in all conditions to match that of the player at all stages of any given corner. Having achieved that level of control, the next step in the process is to calibrate those variables for each car in the game, and do so in a way that the performance would scale up and down to accommodate most skill levels, remaining consistent to that skill level, irrespective of the car track combo in use. We've been chasing that elusive goal consistently, update after update, but this is by far the one where we've covered the most ground on. The most inclusive thing about any sim for me, well, that's a big open question, but one of the most inclusive things is that if you are, say, a beginner or somebody who is of, say, poor skill, you know, I was there, yeah, I still don't think I'm great, but I'm getting better, you can still go and have kind of like a car-to-car race and have some good fun if you've got really good AI, and Automobilista 2 provided that for me, particularly when I started, and it continues to do so, and I think the AI for the most part is pretty good. So it goes, to begin with, we have greatly reduced the track variable from the equation by redoing the racing lines for all tracks that were in any way suboptimal for their performance, a whopping total of 70 line redos in between the previous versions. With some more still to come in time for the official release, these new lines not only improve the AI performance relative to the player, but also help them keep away from track edges and dangerous curbs, and potentially improve the AI assessment of overtaking opportunities. The next step is the sheer grind of manually calibrating the various performance parameters, AI for each car, and we can't yet claim the calibration is 100% for every car and track combo in every possible condition. The discrepancies have been greatly reduced relative to previous versions, where some classes could still have AI cars going 5 seconds slower or faster with a weather swing from dry to wet or vice versa. Still, on the performance side, AI tire wear and the degradation that comes with it has been adjusted for every tire and matches up better with the player, with what the player will experience. Racing behavior, in terms of how AI reacts to cars around it, has been substantially improved in version 1.5.3. They challenge and overtake both player and each other more easily and with less incidents, switch lines more smoothly, hit walls and generally get themselves into less trouble, and are more inclined to back off when crowded out before they're forced off track. Finally, AI pit stop strategy has been worked on class by class. The AI is set with reasonable initial tyre and fuel options for the session ahead, and then proceed to make sensible changes according to varying weather and race conditions or to damage it may have incurred. Cool. There's plenty more to do for AI to be the equivalent of a very capable human driver, but if all the above is realised somewhat close to right, AI can deliver races like the one captured below, and they leave a link. I'll post that again below. They said they got more to demonstrate and show the progress on all types of racing. Over the next few days, he's going to share some more gameplay videos, etc. So shout out. He also shouts out to the MS2 Paddock Club members, of which that's shut now, unfortunately, for the constant influx of reports and feedback during the version 1.5 cycle, and this one, without which so much progress both on physics and AI development would not have been attainable. So shout out to all you guys and girls helping along the journey. Multiplayer development. We're coming to the end of it now. So this is something that kind of I'm really excited about, but it's still not there. It's a little bit buggy. It doesn't quite work with SimRacing GP due to some stuff going on in the background. So like the league stuff is quite hard to get going. But here's what he's got to say. So he says, we're still grinding away hunting some persisting reliability issues in multiplayer, and while we have managed to debug and solve a few more, realistically speaking, unlike single player, this will not be the update in which Automobilista 2 multiplayer makes a huge leap forward. Boo. I'm really jazzed about multiplayer. I really get a lot of fulfillment out of kind of racing other people on track. I think if Automobilista 2 sorts it out, it becomes a juggernaut, but it needs to get there. He says, we have now introduced more in-depth multiplayer logging in order to try gather further info from the community to debug the remaining issues, as one of the big challenges making progress on this front is that we can't reliably reproduce some of the typical issues users commonly run into. Upon version 1.5.3, there will be a new thread for multiplayer reports that users file their reports for troubled sessions along with a log file for the session where it occurred, which hopefully can make more substantial headway. This has got to be the thing that kind of gets sorted, and then I really think this sim title runs away then. It's already very easy to jump into a race and create a lobby within the sim itself. I know particularly I've run a lot of community races myself through AUTOMOBILISTA 2, and we've had a great time. If they nail this, this is a big thing. So I'm really hoping they kind of like sort this out quickly for the future, but you know, I have been waiting a year and longer. Other fixes and improvements were wrapping up. So we said the complete changelog for all smaller improvements and fixes in this update is truly enormous. But he's highlighted a few. So following up on the introduction of a visible safety car in version 1.4, we have expanded on the feature by introducing a number of dedicated safety car models. Very cool. Basically befitting the various classes in AUTOMOBILISTA 2, and added an option for users to configure a scheduled full course yellow for both single and multiplayer races. Great. We have fixed a couple of legacy issues with driver head animations, which meant they had very little movement. That's great too. On the topic of replays, we've discovered another oldie in the code, which forced blurred on medium settings during replays, irrespective of the option the user graphical setting was set to. Replays will follow whatever the user setting is, and having it off solves various graphical artifacts that could be seen during trackside replays. That's good. They've made some improvements to live track, including additional visual and audio cues when driving off the racing line and into the dirtier edges on the track, which sounds of rubbish hitting the car, further hinting to the driver he's not ideally where he should be. Further down the line, a faint offline dust will be visible from behind the car, so the driver behind can know the guy ahead is on the dirt and may have little trouble in the braking zone. A couple of bits and bobs. Vehicle team has pushed hard to finish all the remaining damage and animation components, including matching helmet design, gloves, and drivers overall to their car livery. That's cool. A last minute win, literally, he says, is the fixing of emissive materials on sparks, solved by a new shader expert who just joined us this week to help us pursue the visual improvements we alluded to earlier. Further work to do there, but still it already looks nicer, and there's a little picture there just showing the sparks. And he says, on that bombshell, we have covered all we had to share for this development update. It was particularly massive. Hopefully the news and depth of the work within this next release makes up for the relatively long gap since the last one and the silence in between. We know we have pushed everyone's patience a bit, and generally speaking with the way we have approached AUTOMOBILISTA 2 development over the years, and appreciate some of you might have preferred a more well-rounded, consistent experience, even if it meant narrowing the ultra-wide scope of the sim, but that just wasn't the game we had set out to make. I did allude to that a bit earlier. It's not everybody's cup of tea. You're going to have to decide where you fall on that. Hopefully as we go through delivering on our vision, things start to make a bit more sense and more of you find that patience duly rewarded. With this update, AUTOMOBILISTA 2 should be in a great place for its 2023 grand finale at some point in December. Having wrapped our historical Formula projects for the year, it's time to set the clock back to the future for a different type of racing machinery altogether. We will cover that, and all of that is to come in our final catch-up of the year. Pretty cool stuff. There's a lot of stuff to unpick there. Very long-winded video, but for me, it disciplines me to kind of read this out and unpick it and absorb it myself. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Are you excited for AUTOMOBILISTA 2? What do you want to see? Do you think this is a good development update? Are you happy with the length between kind of development updates? I really like AUTOMOBILISTA 2. I've been a big supporter from the beginning. It's a sim I regularly return to. You know, yeah, okay, it's, you know, it's changed a lot over the kind of like the past year or two. But ultimately, every kind of step, it's like opening a new sim. So every update, this changes dramatically. It's almost like getting a brand new product. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you guys think. And as always, take care. Bye-bye.